During a devastating winter blizzard, elderly veteran William Harrison abandoned his century-old family farm to drive his critically ill neighbor to the hospital 40 miles away. This compassionate act saved the woman's life, but cost William his treasured homestead when the bank accelerated the foreclosure process he'd been fighting for months. 2 weeks after losing everything, as William stood watching his farm being auctioned on the courthouse steps, a sleek black motorcade pulled up, and he discovered the senator who emerged possessed a connection that would transform his life in ways he never imagined. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. William Harrison brushed snow from the faded Marine Corps cap he rarely removed, even indoors, as he carefully examined the property tax notice in his weathered hands. At 73, William's face carried the deep lines and permanent tan of a man who had spent 6 decades tending the same patch of earth. The January wind whistled through gaps in the farmhouse windows. Drafts he hadn't found time to seal before winter settled across Clearwater County. The kitchen table where he sat was the same solid oak where 4 generations of Harrisons had made their decisions, celebrated harvests, and weathered crises since 1919, when his grandfather James returned from World War I and purchased these 320 acres with his service bonus. The farm had survived the Great Depression, endured the Dust Bowl years, and sent 2 sons to every American conflict since. It had never missed a planting season until last year, when William's heart attack had left him unable to work the fields for 3 crucial months. "It's not as bad as it looks, Molly," William murmured to the aging border collie curled at his feet. The dog's grey muzzle lifted at the sound of her name, intelligent eyes fixed on her master's face. "We've got that VA disability payment coming next week. Should cover the property taxes at least." He didn't mention the 3 mortgage payments he'd already missed, or the certified letters from First National Bank that had progressed from politely concerned to explicitly threatening. The most recent, delivered yesterday, had used the word foreclosure for the first time. Through the kitchen window, William could see the snow-covered fields stretching toward the distant tree line. Beneath that pristine white blanket lay soil his family had nurtured for over a century, ground that had produced corn, wheat, and soybeans to feed a nation through wars and peace. Now dormant for winter, the earth waited patiently for spring planting that William wasn't certain would come. His phone rang, the old-fashioned landline he refused to replace, despite his granddaughter Abigail's repeated offers to buy him a smartphone. When the hospital hired her as a nurse last year, she'd moved back to help him manage the farm, living in the small caretaker's cottage 50 yards from the main house. "Harrison Farm," he answered, voice still carrying the authority of a Marine. "Staff Sergeant, despite the decades since his service. Mr. Harrison, this is Patricia Delaney from First National Bank." The voice was professionally courteous, but with an undercurrent of finality that made William's stomach tighten. "I'm calling about your mortgage situation." "Ms. Delaney," William acknowledged, straightening in his chair as if the banker could see him. "I was planning to come in next week. The VA payment—" "I'm afraid we're past that point, Mr. Harrison," she interrupted gently. "The bank's board reviewed your file yesterday. Given the missed payments and your current financial position, they've approved foreclosure proceedings. We'll be sending formal notice tomorrow." William's hand tightened on the receiver. "My family has banked with First National for 100 years. My father helped rebuild your main branch after the tornado of '57. I know the history, Mr. Harrison." Something in her voice suggested she actually did. "That's why we've extended more flexibility than our guidelines typically allow. But the board has made its decision." "How long do I have?" William asked, surprised by the steadiness in his voice. 30 days to bring the loan current. Otherwise the property goes to auction on February 15th. She paused. For what it's worth, I argued your case, given your service record and the farm's significance to the community. Appreciate the effort, William said simply, the decades of military discipline helping him maintain composure. I'll be in touch. After hanging up, William sat motionless at the kitchen table, Molly sensing his distress and pressing her body against his legs. The farm had weathered foreclosure threats twice before, during the agricultural crisis of the 1980s, when his father nearly lost everything, and again in 2008, when commodity prices collapsed. Each time, the Harrison family had found a way through, but William was facing this battle alone. His wife Margaret had passed 5 years ago after 47 years of marriage. Their only son James had died in Afghanistan in 2010. Abigail, their granddaughter, was just starting her career and already helping as much as she could, picking up extra hospital shifts and contributing to household expenses. William poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon, the same brand his father had favored, and carried it to the living room. The walls were covered with Harrison family photographs spanning a century. His grandfather in his doughboy uniform, his father standing proudly beside the farm's first tractor in 1946, William himself in marine dress blues before shipping out to Vietnam in 1969, James in his army uniform before his final deployment. Beside the family photos hung the medals: his grandfather's victory medal from WWI, his father's Bronze Star from the Pacific Campaign, William's own Purple Heart and Combat Action Ribbon, and most painful to look at, James's posthumous Silver Star in its display case. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 4 generations of service, William said softly to the empty room. And this is how it ends. The sound of tires on gravel roused him from his thoughts. Through the front window, he saw Abigail's second-hand Subaru pulling up, returning from her 12-hour shift at Clearwater Regional Hospital. At 27, she had her grandmother's gentle eyes and stubborn chin, and William's iron will. He quickly tucked the foreclosure notice into his shirt pocket. She had enough to worry about without this. "Grandpa," she called, stomping snow from her boots in the entryway. "You won't believe the day I've had. 3 car accidents from the ice storm, and we're short-staffed because half the nurses can't make it in." William forced a smile as she entered, her sharp eyes instantly noticing the bourbon glass in his hand. "Little early for that, isn't it?" she asked, dropping her nurse's bag on a chair. "Everything okay?" "Just warming these old bones," he deflected. "Weather reports saying we might get another 8 inches tonight." Abigail studied him for a moment, clearly unconvinced, but didn't press further. Instead, she moved to the kitchen, opening cupboards and the refrigerator. "We're running low on just about everything. I can make a grocery run tomorrow before my shift if the roads are clear." "Don't worry about it," William said. "I need to go into town anyway." "For what? The truck's almost out of gas and—" She stopped, her expression shifting as she connected invisible dots. "Grandpa, what's going on with the bank?" "I saw Patricia Delaney's number on the caller ID." William sighed. Abigail had always been too perceptive for her own good, even as a child. "Just the usual reminders. Nothing we can't handle." "Don't do that," she said, her voice softening as she sat across from him. "Don't shut me out to protect me. This is my home too." The silence stretched between them, filled with the soft ticking of the grandfather clock that had stood in the same corner since 1922. Finally, William pulled the notice from his pocket and slid it across the table. 30 days, she read, her face paling. "But that's not enough time. What about the VA payment or selling some of the equipment?" "Won't cover what we owe," William admitted. "Farm equipment's depreciated too much, and the VA payment barely covers the property taxes." "Then we'll find another way," Abigail insisted, the determination in her voice so reminiscent of Margaret that it made William's chest ache. "I can pick up more shifts, or maybe a second job. The diner in town is hiring." "Absolutely not," William interrupted, more sharply than he intended. "You're already working 60 hours a week. I won't have you killing yourself over this. And I won't stand by while you lose everything," she shot back, tears of frustration brimming in her eyes. "This farm isn't just land and buildings, Grandpa. It's our heritage. It's where Dad grew up, where I grew up after Mom left. We can't just let it go." William reached across the table and covered her hand with his own, still strong, despite the arthritis that plagued him on cold mornings. "I've been thinking about this for a while, Abby. Maybe it's time. The farmhouse needs major repairs I can't afford. Equipment's breaking down faster than I can fix it." He paused, the admission painful. "And I'm not getting any younger." "So, what, we just give up?" she asked, voice breaking. "What would Grandma say?" The question landed like a physical blow. Margaret Harrison had been the backbone of their family, working the farm alongside William while raising their son, keeping the books, and even driving the combine during harvest when extra hands were needed. She had never surrendered to anything in her life, not even the cancer that ultimately took her. "Your grandmother," William said carefully, "would say we face reality with dignity, that a farm is just land, but family is what matters." Abigail wiped away tears with the back of her hand. "And what would you have said before all this? The William Harrison who taught me that Harrisons don't quit." William had no answer for that. Instead, he stood slowly, joints protesting the movement after sitting too long. "It's getting late. We both need rest. Things might look different in the morning." But the morning brought no new solutions. Only 8 inches of fresh snow and a temperature drop that sent the thermometer plunging to 15 below zero. William rose before dawn, as he had every day of his adult life, stoked the wood stove that supplemented the aging furnace, and made coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. Another Harrison tradition. By 7, he was in the workshop adjacent to the barn, attempting to repair the broken blade on the ancient snowplow he attached to his truck for winter. If he could clear the quarter-mile driveway, at least Abigail could get to work safely. The foreclosure notice sat heavy in his pocket, a physical reminder of the countdown now ticking against the Harrison family legacy. At 9, his neighbor, Eleanor Weber's number flashed on his phone. Eleanor, a widow in her 70s, lived alone on the small 10-acre property that bordered his eastern field. William had kept an eye on her since her husband passed 2 years ago, plowing her driveway and helping with maintenance she couldn't manage alone. "Eleanor? Everything all right?" he answered, immediately concerned. She rarely called this early. "William, I hate to bother you." Her voice sounded strained. "But I'm not feeling well. Chest pains started last night. I thought they'd pass, but they're getting worse." William straightened, immediately alert. "Have you called an ambulance?" "The dispatcher said they're backed up with accidents from the storm. Might be hours before they can get here." She paused, her breathing audibly labored. "My niece in town isn't answering. I don't know who else to call." "Sit tight, Eleanor. I'm coming to get you." William ended the call and glanced out the workshop window. The storm had intensified, snow falling so heavily he could barely see the barn 50 yards away. The driveway remained unplowed, and the county roads would be treacherous at best, impassable at worst. Clearwater Regional Hospital was 40 miles away. He had the farm to think about, the foreclosure countdown, the meeting he'd scheduled with a lawyer in town to discuss possible bankruptcy options, the repairs to the plow that might make the difference in Abigail making it to work safely. But none of that mattered against the life of a neighbor in distress. William grabbed his keys and heavy winter coat, scribbled a note for Abigail explaining the situation, and headed for his truck. The aging Ford F-150 protested the cold, but eventually rumbled to life. Without the snowplow attached, navigating The driveway would be challenging, but the truck's four-wheel drive and William's decades of experience driving in bad conditions would have to suffice. The journey to Eleanor's cottage took 20 minutes instead of the usual 3. The truck fishtailing several times on hidden ice beneath the snow. When he arrived, he found her pale and clammy, clutching her left arm. Classic heart attack symptoms his first aid training immediately recognized. "Hospital's 40 miles, he told her as he helped her into the passenger seat. "Roads are bad, but we'll make it." "William, you shouldn't risk it," she protested weakly. "The ambulance will come eventually." "Eventually might be too late," he said simply, tucking an old blanket around her. "Harrisons don't leave neighbors in trouble." The drive to Clearwater Regional was a white-knuckle journey through near-blizzard conditions. Twice, the truck slid dangerously toward ditches. Once, they had to detour around a jackknife semi blocking the main highway. William drove with the focused intensity he'd once brought to missions in Southeast Asian jungles, his world narrowing to the road ahead and the labored breathing of the woman beside him. When they finally reached the hospital emergency entrance, medical staff rushed out with a wheelchair. William recognized one of the nurses as a friend of Abigail's. "She's presenting with cardiac symptoms," he reported crisply. "Started last night, worsened this morning. No prior heart conditions I'm aware of." The nurse nodded, efficiently taking over as her colleagues wheeled Eleanor inside. "You just drove 40 miles in this storm. The highway patrol closed most roads an hour ago." "Didn't have much choice," William said, suddenly feeling every one of his 73 years as the adrenaline began to ebb. "You should come in too, Mr. Harrison. Get checked out and warm up before heading back." William shook his head. "Need to get home before the storm worsens. My granddaughter will worry." The return journey proved even more treacherous. The snowfall had intensified, reducing visibility to mere yards. What had taken 2 hours on the way to the hospital stretched to nearly 4 on the return trip. Twice, William had to stop and clear the windshield when the wipers couldn't keep up with the accumulation. By the time he finally turned onto the long driveway to Harrison Farm, it was nearly dark, and the truck's fuel gauge hovered just above empty. The Ford lurched and stalled 50 yards from the house, finally surrendering to the combination of extreme cold and low fuel. William trudged the remaining distance on foot, the wind cutting through his layers like knives. Molly's barking greeted him before he reached the porch, and Abigail flung open the door, her face a mask of worry. "Where have you been?" she demanded, as he stamped snow from his boots. "I've been calling for hours. The hospital said you left Eleanor and never came in yourself." "I thought—" her voice broke. "I thought something had happened to you on the roads." "Truck ran out of gas at the end of the driveway," William explained, moving to the fire she'd built in the rarely used living room fireplace. "Phone died, somewhere on Route 16. "You could have died out there," Abigail said, bringing him a mug of hot coffee laced with something stronger. "For future reference, the protocol is to stay at the hospital during a blizzard after driving someone to the ER, not to try to be a hero and drive back." William offered a tired smile. "How's Eleanor?" "Stable. They confirmed it was a heart attack, but they caught it in time. The cardiologist said if she'd waited for an ambulance—" Abigail didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Later that evening, after the worst of the storm had passed and power had been restored to their area, William sat at the kitchen table reviewing what remained of their options. The lawyer's appointment had been cancelled due to the weather, pushing their consultation to next week, precious days lost from their 30-day window. The phone rang just after 9. William answered, expecting perhaps news about Eleanor. "Mr. Harrison, this is Patricia Delaney from First National again." William straightened. "Ms. Delaney, didn't expect to hear from you this late." "I just received a troubling report," she said. "Our records show you missed an appointment with the bankruptcy attorney today." William's jaw tightened. I wasn't aware the bank was monitoring my legal consultations. In foreclosure cases, we're notified of bankruptcy filings that might affect the process, she explained, at least having the grace to sound uncomfortable. The attorney's office mentioned you were coming in to discuss options. I had a medical emergency. Neighbor needed to get to the hospital. There was a pause on the line. In the blizzard? You drove someone to the hospital in these conditions? She needed help, William said simply. Wasn't going to leave her to wait for an ambulance that might not make it. I see, Ms. Delaney said, her tone shifting slightly. Mr. Harrison, I'm calling because there's been a development. The bank has decided to accelerate the foreclosure timeline. William's hand tightened on the receiver. You said I had 30 days. That was before we became aware of potential bankruptcy proceedings, she explained, professional mask firmly back in place. The board has decided to protect the bank's interests by expediting the process. The auction has been rescheduled for next Wednesday. 6 days. William fought to keep his voice even. That's not legal. I have the right to... The acceleration clause in your mortgage agreement gives the bank this option under specific circumstances, she interrupted. The paperwork will be delivered tomorrow. I'm sorry, Mr. Harrison, truly. After she hung up, William sat motionless at the table, the unfairness of it all washing over him in waves. 6 days to somehow find the money to save a century of family history. 6 days before strangers would bid on the land his grandfather had purchased with blood-earned money, where his son had learned to walk, where his wife was buried in the small family plot behind the apple orchard. For the first time since receiving his son's death notification 13 years earlier, William Harrison put his head in his hands and wept. The next morning dawned clear and brutally cold, the storm having blown itself out overnight. William rose at his usual time, made coffee, and fed Molly before Abigail emerged from her room, clearly having slept poorly. I heard the phone last night, she said, pouring herself coffee. More bad news. William nodded, seeing no point in shielding her any longer. Banks accelerated the foreclosure. Auctions on Wednesday. Wednesday? They can't do that. Abigail protested. We had 30 days. Apparently they can, and they have. William pushed a piece of paper across the table, calculations he'd made through a sleepless night. We'd need $87,000 to stop the foreclosure, another $23,000 to clear the property taxes and equipment loans. Abigail stared at the numbers, her nurse's salary and his VA benefits suddenly painfully inadequate against such figures. There has to be something we can do. A loan from somewhere else? Maybe selling part of the land. In 6 days, with no clear way to make payments going forward? William shook his head. I've looked at it from every angle, Abby. Sometimes you have to know when you're beaten. You, she challenged, angry tears in her eyes. The man who taught me that Harrisons never surrender, who drove through a blizzard yesterday to save a neighbor when anyone else would have waited for help to come. You're just giving up? The accusation stung precisely because it struck at the core of who William had always been. A fighter, a survivor, a man who found solutions where others saw only problems. But he was also a realist, and decades of military service had taught him to recognize unwinnable situations. It's not surrender, he said quietly. It's accepting reality. The farmhouse is paid off. We can sell it separately, get enough for a small place in town. You'll be closer to the hospital. No more worrying about heating this drafty old place or keeping the equipment running. This isn't about convenience, Abigail said, her voice breaking. This is our home. Home is people, not places, William replied, echoing words his wife had often said. Your grandmother and I lived in 7 different states during my service. Home was wherever we were together. But even as he said it, William knew it wasn't entirely true. This land was different. It was in his blood, in the Harrison DNA. His grandfather had purchased it with money earned defending his country. His father had expanded it while recovering from wounds received at Okinawa. William himself had found healing here after Vietnam. The quiet rhythms of planting and harvest slowly replacing the chaos of war in his mind. And it was here, beneath the old oak tree behind the house, that they had laid James to rest beside. Margaret, unable to bear the thought of his son in a military cemetery hundreds of miles away. The messenger arrived that afternoon with the accelerated foreclosure notice. A young man who couldn't meet William's eyes as he handed over the envelope and asked for a signature confirming receipt. The formal auction notice was already posted. In the local paper and on the county website, William discovered Harrison Farm, 320 acres with improvements, to be sold to the highest bidder on the courthouse steps at noon on Wednesday, February 3rd. The weekend passed in a blur of activity as William and Abigail began the painful process of sorting through a century of family possessions, deciding what to keep, what to sell, what to discard. Neighbors stopped by with casseroles and offers of help, news of the auction having spread quickly through the tight-knit rural community. Some brought stories of their own struggles with banks and foreclosures. Others simply sat with William on the porch, sharing coffee or something stronger, offering the quiet solidarity of those who understood the profound connection between farmers and their land. On Monday morning, William drove to the town's only storage facility and rented the largest unit they had, still woefully inadequate for a fraction of what they needed to preserve. By Tuesday, they had filled it with family photographs, military memorabilia, Margaret's hand-pieced quilts, and the smaller antiques that had been passed down through generations. That evening, as they sat exhausted at the kitchen table, the phone rang. William answered to find Eleanor Weber on the line, her voice stronger than when he'd last heard it. "William, the doctors say I'm going home tomorrow," she reported. "They're putting in stents, but I should make a full recovery." She paused. "They also say if I'd waited for that ambulance, we wouldn't be having this conversation. You saved my life." "Anyone would have done the same," William demurred. "No," Eleanor said firmly. "Anyone would have called 911 again and told me to—" "Sit tight. You drove through a blizzard, risking your own life." Another pause. "My niece told me about the auction tomorrow. Is there anything I can do?" "Just focus on your recovery," William said, unwilling to burden her with problems she couldn't solve. "Glad you're on the mend." After hanging up, he found Abigail watching him with an expression that reminded him painfully of Margaret. The look she'd given him when he was being particularly stubborn about something. "What?" he asked. "You really believe that, don't you?" she said, "that anyone would have done what you did for Eleanor?" William shrugged uncomfortably. It was the right thing to do. The right thing that cost you your final chance to meet with the lawyer. That gave the bank the excuse they needed to accelerate everything. Abigail shook her head. "You know what I realized today, sorting through all those boxes. Every generation of Harrisons has sacrificed something for others. Great-grandpa gave up his bonus to buy this land after seeing how many of his fellow soldiers came home to nothing. Grandpa expanded it to create jobs for veterans after World War II. You and Grandma took in other military families during hard times." She reached across the table and took his hand. "Maybe that's the real Harrison legacy. Not the land itself, but the willingness to put others first, even when it costs us everything." William felt something shift in his chest at her words. Not acceptance exactly, but perhaps the first glimmer of peace with what was to come. The farm would pass to new owners tomorrow, but the values it had nurtured across 4 generations would continue. That night, William walked the boundaries of the property one last time, Molly faithfully at his heels despite the cold. The moon was full, casting silver light across snow-covered fields that sparkled like diamonds. He stopped at each landmark that held significance, the old oak where he had proposed to Margaret in 1971, the pond where he had taught James to fish, the apple orchard they had planted the year Abigail was born. Finally, he made his way to the small family cemetery where Margaret and James rested beneath simple granite markers. He stood there for a long time, the cold forgotten as he silently communed with the two people he had loved most in the world. "I'm sorry," he whispered finally. "I tried." The wind rustled through the bare branches of the surrounding trees, not in accusation, it seemed to William, but in gentle absolution. Wednesday dawned clear and cold, the sun rising over Harrison Farm for what William believed would be his last morning as its caretaker. He dressed with particular care, in his best flannel shirt and the one suit he owned, last worn to James's funeral. In the pocket, he placed the only item he intended to bid on at the auction, his grandfather's pocket watch, pawned during especially hard times in the 1930s and never reclaimed, recently discovered listed among the items from the farmhouse that would be sold separately. Abigail emerged from her room, similarly dressed in her best clothes, though her red-rimmed eyes betrayed a night spent grieving rather than sleeping. "Ready?" she asked simply. William nodded, not trusting himself to speak. They drove to the county courthouse in Abigail's Subaru, the truck still out of gas and half buried in snow at the end of the driveway. The courthouse square was unusually crowded for a Wednesday morning, William noticed. Nearly 24 vehicles parked around the perimeter, including several expensive SUVs with out-of-state plates. "Vultures," Abigail muttered as they passed. A group of well-dressed men comparing notes on tablets. Probably developers looking to subdivide the farm for vacation properties. William said nothing, his jaw clenched as they climbed the courthouse steps. Inside, the crowd was even larger, filling the hallway outside the main courtroom where the auction would take place. William recognized some faces, neighboring farmers, old friends, a few veterans he knew from the VFW hall. Others were strangers, with the polished look of moneyed interests from the city. The doors opened precisely at 11:30, allowing the crowd to file into the courtroom. William and Abigail found seats in the second row, directly behind the table where Patricia Delaney sat with the bank's attorney, a balding man in an expensive suit who didn't bother to acknowledge them. At 11:45, Judge Harold Simmons entered the courtroom, a man William knew slightly from community events and veteran gatherings. The judge nodded almost imperceptibly in William's direction before taking his seat and calling the room to order. "Before we proceed with today's foreclosure auction," Judge Simmons announced, "I will review the particulars of the case. First, National Bank vs. William Harrison, concerning the property commonly known as Harrison Farm, 320 acres with improvements, located at 1919 County Road 7, Clearwater County." The judge put on reading glasses and reviewed documents before him. "The court has confirmed that proper notice was served and that the accelerated foreclosure timeline falls within the legal parameters established in the original mortgage agreement. Unless there are objections or motions to be heard, we will proceed with the auction at noon." William sat straight-backed in his seat, the military bearing ingrained through decades of service, helping him maintain dignity as his world collapsed around him. Beside him, Abigail gripped his hand so tightly her knuckles were white. "Are there any motions before we proceed?" Judge Simmons asked, looking directly at William. William started to shake his head, but was interrupted by movement at the back of the courtroom as the doors opened. A murmur ran through the crowd as several men in dark suits entered, followed by a distinguished-looking woman in her 60s, with silver-streaked dark hair. "Your Honor," called a voice from the new arrivals, "the state requests a brief recess before proceeding." Judge Simmons peered over his glasses at the newcomers, his expression unreadable. "Senator Mitchell, this is unexpected. On what grounds do you request a recess? The silver-haired woman stepped forward. On the grounds that new information relevant to this case has just come to my attention, Your Honor. Information that may significantly impact these proceedings. The bank's attorney rose quickly. Your Honor, with all due respect to the senator, this is a straightforward foreclosure case. The presence of a political figure should not delay established legal proceedings. Judge Simmons studied the senator for a moment, then checked his watch. I'll grant a 15-minute recess. Court will reconvene at 12:15. He banged his gavel once and stood. As the courtroom erupted in confused conversations, William turned to look at the woman who had interrupted the auction. Senator Elizabeth Mitchell. He recognized her now from news coverage. A second-term U.S. senator known for her advocacy on veterans' issues and agricultural policy. What possible interest could she have in a small farm foreclosure in Clearwater County? Before he could process further, one of the men who had entered with the senator approached their row. "Mr. Harrison?" the man asked quietly. "Senator Mitchell would like a word with you in private. Would you and your granddaughter please come with me?" William exchanged a bewildered glance with Abigail, then nodded, following the man through a side door into a small conference room where Senator Mitchell waited alone. "Mr. Harrison," she said, extending her hand. "I apologize for the dramatic entrance, but I only learned about your situation this morning. When I heard the name Harrison Farm, I had my staff confirm it was the same property." She gestured to chairs around the table. "Please, sit, we don't have much time." Still confused, but instinctively responding to the authority in her voice, William and Abigail sat across from the senator. "Ma'am, forgive me," William said, "but I don't understand what interest you would have in our foreclosure." Senator Mitchell smiled slightly. "That's a fair question. The simple answer is that I have a personal connection to Harrison Farm, one I wasn't aware of until recently." She opened a folder she had brought with her. "Mr. Harrison, did you by any chance drive your neighbor Eleanor Weber to the hospital during last week's blizzard?" William blinked at the unexpected question. "Yes, ma'am. She was having a heart attack. Ambulance couldn't get there in time." "Eleanor Weber is my aunt," the senator said quietly. "My mother's sister." William stared at her, the pieces slowly clicking into place. He had known Eleanor had family in politics, but he'd never connected the dots to Senator Mitchell, whose home district was on the other side of the state. "She called me from the hospital," Senator Mitchell continued. "Told me how you risked your life to save hers, how you chose helping her over a crucial meeting that might have saved your farm." "It was the right thing to do," William said simply. "Yes, it was," the senator agreed, "and it made me curious about the man who would make such a sacrifice. So I had my staff research Harrison Farm and its history." She slid several documents across the table. "What we found was remarkable. 4 generations of service to country, community leadership during crises, a century of stewarding land that's produced food for our nation through depression, war, and natural disasters." She leaned forward. "We also found something else, something that changes everything about this foreclosure." William glanced at Abigail, who looked as confused as he felt. "I don't understand." Mr. Harrison, are you aware that in 2018, Congress passed the Veterans Agricultural Support and Protection Act?" Senator Mitchell asked. William shook his head. "Can't say that I am." "It's not surprising. The provision was buried in a larger agricultural bill, but it specifically protects farms owned by combat-decorated veterans from accelerated foreclosure proceedings without additional review by the Department of Veterans Affairs." She tapped one of the documents. "As a Purple Heart recipient, you qualify for these protections, protections that First National Bank appears to have ignored entirely." William felt a surge of hope for the first time in weeks. You're saying the accelerated foreclosure isn't legal? It is. I'm saying it deserves significantly more scrutiny than it's received, the senator replied carefully. I've already contacted the VA's legal department. They're prepared to file an immediate injunction on your behalf. Abigail leaned forward. What does that mean exactly? It means, Senator Mitchell explained, that today's auction will not proceed. The bank will be required to return to the original 30-day timeline at minimum, possibly longer, once the VA reviews the case. She smiled. It gives us time, Mr. Harrison. Time to find a better solution than losing a century of family history. William's military training had taught him to be wary of last-minute rescues and promises that seemed too good to be true. With all due respect, Senator, why would you get involved in my situation? There must be thousands of veterans facing foreclosure across the country. The senator's expression softened. Because my aunt told me what kind of man you are, because 4 generations of your family have served this country with distinction, and because the senator's expression softened. Because my aunt told me what kind of man you are, because 4 generations of your family have served this country with distinction, and because sometimes standing up for one person is how we begin to fix a broken system. She checked her watch. We need to get back to the courtroom. Let me do the talking. William hardly felt the walk back to the courtroom, his mind racing with this unexpected development. Around him, the crowd had grown larger during the recess, whispers and speculation filling the air as they took their seats. Patricia Delaney and the bank's attorney were engaged in intense conversation, occasionally glancing toward the door where William entered with Senator Mitchell. At precisely 12:15, Judge Simmons returned to the bench, calling the court to order. I understand there is a motion to be presented, the judge stated, looking toward Senator Mitchell. Yes, Your Honor, the senator confirmed, rising from her seat. I appear today as an interested party in these proceedings, and I move for an immediate stay of this auction pending review by the Department of Veterans Affairs. The bank's attorney shot to his feet. Your Honor, with all due respect to the senator, she has no standing in this case. This is a straightforward matter between First National Bank and Mr. Harrison. Senator Mitchell remained composed. Your Honor, I submit that under the Veterans Agricultural Support and Protection Act of 2018, specifically Section 47B, combat-decorated veterans are entitled to additional protections against accelerated foreclosure proceedings, including mandatory review by the VA before any auction can take place. She approached the bench, handing the judge a document. This is the relevant section of the law, along with verification of Mr. Harrison's status as a Purple Heart recipient from his service in Vietnam. Judge Simmons studied the document carefully, occasionally glancing toward William. After what seemed an eternity, he looked up. Mr. Clarkson, he addressed the bank's attorney, are you familiar with this provision of the 2018 Agricultural Bill? The attorney appeared flustered. Your Honor, I would need to consult with... I'll take that as a no, Judge Simmons interrupted. Ms. Delaney, was First National Bank aware of Mr. Harrison's status as a combat-decorated veteran when you accelerated the foreclosure proceedings? Patricia Delaney stood, visibly uncomfortable. We were aware of Mr. Harrison's veteran status, Your Honor, but not of any special protections that might apply. Ignorance of the law is not a defense, Ms. Delaney, Judge Simmons stated firmly, particularly when we're discussing legislation specifically designed to protect those who have served and sacrificed for this country. He removed his glasses and surveyed the courtroom. I am granting a 30-day stay of these proceedings. During this time, Mr. Harrison's case will be reviewed by the appropriate VA authorities to determine if additional protections apply. The auction scheduled for today is hereby cancelled. The sharp crack of the gavel echoed through the suddenly silent courtroom. For a moment, no one moved. Then, from the back of the room, someone began to applaud. Others joined in, the sound swelling until it filled the space. Farmers, veterans, community members who had come to witness what they thought would be the end of Harrison Farm. The bank's attorney hurriedly gathered his papers, his face flushed. With embarrassment or anger, perhaps both. Patricia Delaney lingered, looking toward William with an expression that might have been regret before following her colleague from the courtroom. William sat motionless, the judge's words still ringing in his ears. 30 days. Not salvation, but a reprieve. Time to breathe, to think, to plan. Beside him, Abigail gripped his hand, tears streaming freely down her face now. "It's not over. Grandpa," she whispered, "we have a chance." As the courtroom began to empty, people stopped to shake William's hand or pat his shoulder in solidarity. Judge Simmons disappeared through the door behind the bench without another glance in their direction, his official role completed. Senator Mitchell approached, accompanied by 2 aides who had been taking notes throughout the proceedings. "This is just the beginning, Mr. Harrison," she said. "The VA review will buy us time, but we need to use it wisely. I'd like you to meet with my staff this afternoon if possible to discuss next steps." William nodded, still struggling to process the rapid turn of events. "I don't know how to thank you, Senator." "Thank me by not giving up," she replied simply. "The fight for Harrison Farm is just beginning." The meeting took place in the private dining room of Clearwater's only hotel, a modest establishment that nonetheless scrambled to accommodate the unexpected visit from a U.S. Senator. William and Abigail sat across from Senator Mitchell and her chief of staff, a sharp-eyed woman named Rebecca Chen, who typed notes on a sleek laptop. "Let me be clear about where we stand," the senator began, after preliminary introductions. "The judge's ruling gives us breathing room, but it's temporary. We need to develop a comprehensive strategy to address the underlying financial issues." "The truth is, Senator," William admitted, "even if we get the full 30 days, I don't see how we make up the shortfall. The numbers just don't work." "Then we need to change the numbers," Senator Mitchell replied, with the confidence of someone accustomed to solving seemingly insurmountable problems. "Ms. Chen, would you walk us through the options we've identified?" Rebecca Chen turned her laptop so they could see the screen. "We've identified several potential paths forward, Mr. Harrison. First, there's the legislative angle. The 2018 Act provides for emergency bridge loans to qualifying veterans in agricultural distress, but the application process typically takes months." "We don't have months," Abigail pointed out, "which is why I've already reached out to the Secretary of Veterans Affairs," Senator Mitchell interjected. "He's agreed to expedite your case personally." William stared at her. "You spoke to the Secretary today?" The senator smiled slightly. "One of the advantages of my position is that people generally take my calls." She nodded for Ms. Chen to continue. "The second path involves restructuring your existing debt," Chen explained. "First National isn't the only banking option, especially now that we've demonstrated they failed to comply with federal protections for veteran farmers. Several agricultural credit unions specialize in situations like yours." William shook his head. "With all due respect, refinancing just kicks the can down the road. The farm's operating costs exceed its income. Has for years, if I'm being honest." "Which brings us to the third option," Chen continued smoothly. "Modernization and diversification. Your farm currently focuses on traditional crops, corn, soybeans, wheat, but there are high-margin specialty crops that could significantly change your financial picture. At my age, I'm not looking to reinvent the wheel," William said, resistance evident in his tone. Senator Mitchell leaned forward. "Mr. Harrison, do you know why I've served on the Agricultural Committee since entering the Senate, despite representing a district that includes our state's largest city?" William shook his head. "Because my grandfather was a farmer who lost everything in the 1980s farm crisis. Because I believe family farms are the backbone of this country. Not just economically, but as repositories of values we can't afford to lose. She tapped the table for emphasis. The truth is, thousands of family farms like yours disappear every year, swallowed by corporate agriculture or developers. Each one represents a loss that can't be recovered. Generations of knowledge, connection to the land, community anchors. William felt her words resonate with his own unspoken thoughts. So, what are you proposing exactly? A comprehensive approach, the senator replied. Yes, we'll fight for the VA loan. Yes, we'll explore refinancing options. But most importantly, we need to make Harrison Farm viable for the next 100 years, not just the next payment cycle. She signaled to Chen, who pulled up a different document on her laptop. Our office has been working with agricultural extension programs at the State University on sustainable farming initiatives for veterans, small-scale intensive production that requires less acreage and physical labor but produces higher-value crops. Like what? Abigail asked, leaning forward with interest. Specialized organic vegetables for farm-to-table restaurants. Heritage grain varieties that command premium prices from artisanal bakeries and breweries. Specialty honey production, berry cultivation. Chen scrolled through photographs of thriving small farms. These operations generate 3 to 5 times the revenue per acre of conventional crops. William frowned. Sounds like a lot of new equipment, new knowledge. I'm not sure. It's not replacing what you do, Mr. Harrison, Senator Mitchell interrupted gently. It's adding new dimensions, and you wouldn't do it alone. The program includes mentorship, training, and initial capital investment. The conversation continued for another hour, delving into specifics of farm operations, potential markets, and financial projections. Throughout, William felt a curious mixture of hope and skepticism. The senator's plan wasn't a quick fix. It was a complete reimagining of Harrison Farm's future. Part of him resisted the very notion of change. Another part recognized the wisdom in adaptation. As the meeting concluded, Senator Mitchell handed William her personal card. I'm returning to Washington tonight, but my staff will remain in Clearwater to work with you. This isn't just about saving one farm, Mr. Harrison. It's about proving that with the right support, family farms can thrive again. In the car driving home, Abigail could barely contain her excitement. Did that really just happen? A U.S. senator personally intervening to help us? It's like something from a movie. William stared out the window at the passing landscape, the snow-covered fields glowing gold in the late afternoon light. Don't count your chickens, Abby. We've got a stay of execution, not a pardon. But you heard all those ideas, the specialty crops, the veteran farming initiative. There's real potential there. There's also real risk, William countered. Changing everything we've done for generations, taking on new debt, even if it's at better terms. Abigail glanced at him, her excitement dimming. You don't sound like someone who just got a miracle, Grandpa. You sound like someone looking for reasons why it won't work. Her words struck uncomfortably close to truth. William had spent so many weeks preparing for the worst, armoring himself against inevitable loss, that hope felt almost dangerous now. I've seen too many false dawns, he said finally. Too many promises that didn't pan out. So what? We just give up after everything that happened today? William sighed. No, we proceed carefully. We listen to the senator's people. But we also prepare for the possibility that 30 days from now, we're right back where we started. The next morning brought fresh challenges. News of the dramatic courtroom scene had spread throughout the county, making William reluctantly famous overnight. Local reporters called for interviews. Neighbors stopped by with well wishes and questions. Even the bank reached out, Patricia Delaney herself, calling to assure William that First National wanted to work collaboratively toward a mutually beneficial solution. her tone suggesting the bank was desperately trying to avoid the negative publicity of foreclosing on a decorated veteran. By noon, the farmhouse kitchen had become an impromptu command center. Rebecca Chen arrived with 2 agricultural specialists from the University Extension program, spreading maps and soil analysis. Reports across the kitchen table. Senator Mitchell's regional director joined them, coordinating with VA officials in Washington about expediting the emergency loan application. William retreated to the porch, overwhelmed by the sudden activity in his normally quiet home. Molly, him followed, settling at his feet as he watched snow melt dripping from the eaves, a sure sign that temperatures were rising despite the lingering winter chill. "Mind if I join you?" a voice asked. William turned to find one of the agricultural specialists, a man in his 50s with weathered hands that marked him as someone who didn't just study farming from behind a desk. "Free country," William replied with a shrug. The man settled into the neighboring chair. "Jim Erickson, I run the Veteran Farming Transition program at the university." "Seems everyone's suddenly very interested in my farm, Mr. Erickson." "Jim, please." He smiled slightly. "And it's not sudden for some of us. I've been tracking the loss of veteran-owned farms for 15 years, written 3 grant proposals to address it, testified before state and federal committees. But bureaucracy moves slowly until something or someone forces the issue." William studied him more carefully. "You a veteran yourself?" "Army, 3rd Infantry Division, 2 tours in Iraq." William nodded, a subtle shift in his posture acknowledging the shared experience. "Marines, Vietnam, 69 to 71. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the peculiar brotherhood of those who had served, creating an immediate understanding between them. "Your granddaughter showed me around the farm while you were on the phone," Jim said eventually. "You've kept this place going through some tough times." "Done my best." "She also showed me your workshop, that old John Deere you rebuilt from scratch, the irrigation system you modified." Jim turned to face him directly. "You're an innovator, Mr. Harrison. Always have been from what I can see." William shrugged uncomfortably. "Just making do with what I had." "That's exactly what we're proposing now. This isn't about abandoning what made Harrison Farm special. It's about adapting to ensure it survives." Something in the man's tone, soldier to soldier, farmer to farmer, breached the wall of skepticism William had maintained. "Tell me honestly, do you really think it can work? Or is this all political theater to make the senator look good?" Jim considered the question seriously. Politics is certainly part of it. Senator Mitchell needs success stories to support her rural revitalization agenda. But that doesn't mean it can't genuinely help you. He leaned forward. "The cold, hard truth. Traditional commodity farming is a losing game for operations your size. Has been for decades. But there are models that work. Specialized, sustainable. Approaches that don't require the massive scale of corporate agriculture." He pointed toward the distant fields. "You've got good land, good water, generations of knowledge. What you need is a strategy that plays to those strengths instead of trying to compete where you can't win." William absorbed this, recognizing the ring of truth in the assessment. "And your program can provide that strategy? The blueprint, yes. Some initial funding, yes. But ultimately, it's about giving you and your granddaughter the tools to chart your own course." Jim stood. "Just think about it. That's all I'm asking." Inside, the activity continued through the afternoon. Abigail moved seamlessly between conversations, asking pointed questions, taking notes, her medical training evident in her methodical approach to absorbing complex information. William watched with a mixture of pride and something close to awe. When had his granddaughter become this capable, confident adult? As evening approached, the visitors began to disperse, promising to return the next day to continue developing what they now called the Harrison Farm Revitalization Plan. Rebecca Chen was the last to leave. reviewing the day's progress with William and Abigail. "We've made significant headway," she reported. "The VA has already initiated review of your case under the 2018 Act provisions. We've also identified 3 potential lending partners with experience in veteran agricultural transitions." She handed William a folder. "These are the preliminary assessments from the agricultural team. They've identified 5 acres on your eastern boundary that have ideal soil composition and microclimate for specialty berry cultivation. Low initial investment, high return potential, and requires minimal physical exertion compared to traditional crops." William accepted the folder without opening it. "I appreciate all this effort, Ms. Chen, but I'm still not clear on why the senator has taken such a personal interest in my situation." Chen's professional demeanor softened slightly. "Senator Mitchell rarely discusses this publicly, but her father was a Vietnam veteran who struggled to find support when he returned. By the time systems were in place to help him, it was too late." She closed her laptop. "This is political for her, yes, but it's also personal." After Chen departed, the farmhouse fell into an unaccustomed silence. William and Abigail ate, a simple dinner, neither quite ready to discuss the whirlwind their lives had become. Only when they settled in the living room, the day's documentation spread across the coffee table, did Abigail finally speak. "What are you thinking, Grandpa?" "Really thinking?" William considered the question carefully. "I'm thinking that a week ago I was preparing to lose everything. Now suddenly there's a room full of people with impressive credentials telling me not only can we save the farm, but we can transform it into something better." He shook his head. "Part of me is waiting for the other shoe to drop." "And if it doesn't," Abigail pressed, "if this is genuine, if we actually have a shot at not just saving Harrison Farm, but making it thrive again?" William picked up one of the reports, a soil analysis showing ideal conditions for berry cultivation in a section of land he'd always considered marginal for traditional crops. The scientific evidence was compelling, as were the market projections for organic, locally grown berries sold to high-end restaurants and at farmers' markets in the nearest city. "I keep thinking about your great-grandfather," he said finally. "After World War I, everyone told him he was crazy to buy this land. It had been over-farmed, they said, soil depleted, but he saw potential where others didn't." William sat down the report and picked up another, this one outlining potential grants for veterans transitioning to sustainable agriculture. "Each generation of Harrisons has had to reinvent this farm in some way. My father switched from dairy to crops after World War II, when he couldn't handle the physical demands of dairy farming with his war injuries. I introduced new irrigation methods when I took over." He looked up at Abigail. "Maybe this is your generation's reinvention." "Our generation," she corrected. "I can't do this alone, Grandpa. I'm an old dog, Abby, not sure how many new tricks I've got left in me." She smiled. "From what I saw today, you've got plenty. The agricultural specialists were impressed with your modifications to the irrigation system, said you'd implemented concepts they're only now teaching in university courses." Before William could respond, his phone rang. The landline he still preferred to Abigail's repeated offers of a smartphone. The number was unfamiliar. "Harrison Farm," he answered. "Mr. Harrison, this is Eleanor Weber." "Eleanor!" William straightened. "Should you be making calls? I thought you'd still be in the hospital." "They're releasing me tomorrow," she replied. "But I couldn't wait to call. My niece told me what happened at the courthouse today." "Your niece has been extraordinarily helpful," William said, still processing the unlikely chain of events that had led a U.S. senator to intervene in his farm foreclosure. "I had no idea Senator Mitchell was related to you." "Elizabeth has always been private about family connections. Doesn't want people thinking she plays favorites." Eleanor's voice strengthened with pride. But when she heard what you did for me driving through that blizzard, and then learning about the farm situation, it was quite a dramatic moment in the courtroom, William admitted. I just wanted to say how happy I am things are looking up, and to tell you that Elizabeth doesn't do anything halfway. If she's committed to helping you save Harrison Farm, she'll move heaven and earth to make it happen. After saying goodbye to Eleanor, William returned to find Abigail reviewing the stack of materials the various experts had left behind. I've been thinking, she said without looking up, about what Jim Erickson said regarding specialized crops. The berry cultivation sounds promising, but what about the North Field? It's always been challenging for traditional crops because of the shade from the woodlot. William nodded. Too shady for corn or soybeans, but the soil's good. What if we considered mushroom cultivation? I read about a veteran in Oregon who converted a similar area to growing specialty mushrooms for restaurants. Low startup costs, minimal equipment needs, and it can be done around my hospital schedule. William blinked, surprised by how quickly Abigail had moved from skepticism to active planning. Mushrooms. Shiitake oyster, lion's mane, varieties that sell for $15 to $20 a pound to restaurants and at farmers markets. The University Extension Office has a specialist who could advise us. Her eyes brightened with excitement. It's just an idea. But I've been researching sustainable farming options for months, ever since I realized how serious the financial situation was becoming. You never said anything, William observed. Because you weren't ready to hear it, Abigail replied gently. You were still trying to save the farm the old way, and I respected that, but now, she gestured to the materials around them. Now we have experts who can help us implement these ideas. Potential funding, support systems. William felt a complex wave of emotions. Pride in his granddaughter's initiative, a twinge of regret that she'd felt unable to share her ideas earlier. And beneath it all, a growing sense that perhaps they were standing at the threshold of something new and promising rather than the end of everything he valued. Mushrooms, he repeated, a slight smile forming. Your grandmother would have loved that idea. She was always telling me we should diversify. Abigail's phone chimed with a text message. She checked it, then looked up with excitement. That's Rebecca Chen. She says the VE has already assigned a case manager to our file, someone who specializes in veteran farm preservation. They want to meet with us tomorrow morning. The rapid pace of developments was dizzying after months of slow, grinding fear and uncertainty. William stood and walked to the window, looking out at the land that had been Harrison ground for over a century. The snow was receding, revealing patches of soil, his soil, beneath. In a month or two, it would be planting season. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to imagine being here to see seeds go into that ground. Mushrooms in the North Field, he said thoughtfully. Berries on the eastern slope. What about the main acreage? Abigail joined him at the window. Jim mentioned heritage grains, lower yield than commercial varieties, but they sell for 3 to 4 times the price to specialty bakeries and brewers. William nodded, his mind already calculating the adjustments needed. Different equipment settings, altered planting schedules, new harvesting techniques. The farmer in him, dormant during the long months of pending foreclosure, was awakening again, engaging with problems he could potentially solve rather than an inevitable loss he could only endure. It won't be easy, he warned. We'd be learning new methods, developing new markets. At my age, at your age, you have more farming knowledge in your little finger than most agricultural graduates have in their entire bodies, Abigail interrupted. And I'm a quick study. She took his hand. We can do this, Grandpa. Not just save the farm, but make it something that can support us both long-term, something that honors the past while building for the future. Looking into her determined face, William felt something shift within him, the stubborn resistance to change, giving way to the recognition that adaptation had always been the true Harrison legacy. His grandfather adapting to civilian life after the trenches of World War I. His father adapting his farming methods to accommodate war injuries. William himself adapting to new technologies throughout his farming career. "All right," he said finally. "Let's see what these experts have to say tomorrow. Let's explore the VA loan options, but we proceed carefully, eyes wide open." Abigail's face broke into a relieved smile. "That's all I'm asking." As she gathered the materials into organized piles for the next day's meetings, William returned to the porch, wanting a moment alone to process the dramatic reversal of their fortunes. The night was clear and cold, stars emerging in the darkening sky. In the distance, he could see the lights of neighboring farms, companions in the challenging but essential work of drawing life from the soil. Molly joined him, pressing against his leg in silent companionship. William scratched behind her ears, in thinking about the journey that had led them here, from the brink of losing everything to the unexpected opportunity to reimagine everything. "We might just make it after all, old girl," he told the dog quietly, "but it's going to be a different farm than the one we've known." Molly looked up at him with complete trust, unconcerned with the details as long as they remained together. On familiar ground, William envied her simple certainty. For himself, he knew the path ahead would be complex, challenging, and filled with difficult adaptations. But for the first time in months, it was a path that led forward rather than to an ending. The kitchen clock chimed 9, the same clock that had marked time in the Harrison farmhouse since 1943. William smiled slightly at the familiar sound. Some things would change in the coming months, others would remain steadfastly the same. The trick, he was beginning to understand, was knowing which was which. "Time to rest, Molly," he said, rising from his chair. "Tomorrow's going to be a busy day." The next morning dawned with a clarity that seemed to mirror William's newfound sense of purpose. He rose before sunrise, a habit cultivated through decades of farming and military service, and stood at his bedroom window, watching the eastern sky lighten over fields that, perhaps, would remain Harrison land after all. Downstairs, he found Abigail already awake, laptop open at the kitchen table, multiple browser tabs displaying research on sustainable agriculture, veteran farming programs, and specialty crop markets. "How long have you been up?" he asked, moving to start the coffee. "Since 5, she admitted, stifling a yawn. "Couldn't sleep. Too many ideas spinning around." William glanced at her screen, noting detailed notes on mushroom cultivation techniques. "You're really serious about this?" "Dead serious," she confirmed, turning the laptop to show him. "Look at these numbers. A quarter acre of specialty mushrooms can generate $25,000 to $40,000 annually with minimal equipment investment. The North Field has nearly 2 acres of suitable terrain." William whistled softly. "That's more per acre than we ever made on corn." "Exactly, and there's grant funding specifically for veterans transitioning to sustainable agriculture." She pushed a printout toward him. "The Farmer Veteran Coalition offers up to $50,000 in startup financing, with preferred terms for Purple Heart recipients." William studied the document while the coffee brewed, impressed despite his lingering skepticism. The program seemed legitimate, with success stories from veterans across the country who had launched specialized agricultural operations after military service. "You've been researching this for a while," he observed. Abigail nodded, a hint of apology in her expression. "Since your heart attack last year, I knew things were worse financially than you were letting on. I wanted to have options ready when you were finally willing to consider them." The realization that his granddaughter had been quietly preparing contingency plans while he stubbornly refused to acknowledge the farm's precarious position stirred complex emotions in William. Gratitude for her foresight, regret for his own, rigidity, and a deepening appreciation for the capable woman she had become. "Your grandmother would be proud," he said simply. "She always said you had her stubbornness and my tactical thinking." Abigail smiled. High praise indeed. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Rebecca Chen and Jim Erickson, followed shortly by a woman who introduced herself as Maria Vasquez, the VA case manager assigned to William's file. They gathered around the kitchen table, which had become command central for Operation Save Harrison Farm, as Abigail had begun calling it. "We've made significant progress overnight," Ms. Vasquez began, opening a leather portfolio. "I've reviewed your service record, Mr. Harrison, as well as the farm's history and current financial situation. Based on the Veterans Agricultural Support and Protection Act provisions, we are prepared to immediately issue a formal protection order that will extend the foreclosure stay from 30 days to 90 days. William straightened in his chair. 90 days? Yes, with the possibility of further extension if you're actively implementing an approved agricultural transition plan. She slid a document across the table. This is the VA's preliminary assessment of your eligibility for the Emergency Veteran Farm Preservation Loan Program. Based on your service record, Purple Heart status, and the farm's historical significance, you qualify for the maximum amount, $200,000 at 5% interest over 30 years. William stared at the figure. That would clear the existing bank debt with room to spare. Precisely, Ms. Vasquez confirmed, and it would be structured to allow minimal payments during the first 3 years while you implement the transition plan, giving you breathing room to establish new revenue streams. Jim Erickson spoke next, spreading a detailed map of Harrison Farm across the table. "We've spent the morning analyzing soil samples from the eastern and northern sections. The results confirm what we suspected. Ideal conditions for the specialty. Crops we've been discussing?" Using a marker, he circled various sections of the property. "Here, the eastern slope with southern exposure, perfect for berry cultivation. Here, the shadier northern section near the woodlot, excellent for mushroom operations. And the main acreage could be divided, some remaining in traditional crops, while we gradually transition sections to heritage grains." William studied the map, seeing his familiar land suddenly transformed through a new lens of possibility. The areas Jim highlighted had always been challenging for conventional farming, too shady, too sloped, too different from the prime flat acreage that made up the bulk of the property. But those very limitations made them perfect for the specialized crops being proposed. "What about equipment?" William asked. "Some of these operations would require completely different machinery than what I have." "That's where the transitional grant program comes in," Rebecca Chen explained, pulling up spreadsheets on her tablet. "Senator Mitchell's office has identified 3 separate funding sources for veteran agricultural transitions. Combined with the VA loan, they would provide approximately $75,000 specifically earmarked for equipment acquisition and infrastructure development. And not everything requires heavy machinery," Jim added. "The mushroom cultivation, for instance, primarily needs a climate-controlled growing environment, which could be created by retrofitting your existing equipment shed rather than purchasing new buildings." The meeting continued for hours, delving into specifics of implementation timelines, market development strategies, and potential community partnerships. Throughout, William found himself increasingly engaged, his initial resistance giving way to a farmer's instinctive interest in making things grow. The plan these experts were developing wasn't just financial resuscitation, it was a comprehensive reimagining of what Harrison Farm could become while honoring what it had always been. By mid-afternoon, when the visitors finally departed with promises to return the following day, William and Abigail sat surrounded by maps, projections, and detailed action steps for the coming weeks. "It's a lot to take in," Abigail acknowledged, gathering scattered papers into organized piles. William nodded, feeling simultaneously overwhelmed and energized. "It's essentially starting over at 73. "Not starting over," Abigail corrected gently. "Evolving. Using everything you've learned from a lifetime of farming, just applying it differently." She hesitated. "What do you think, honestly?" William considered the question carefully. "I think it's the best chance we've got. More than that, I think it might actually work." He picked up the VA loan documentation. This alone would clear the immediate crisis. And the transition plan. "It's exciting, isn't it?" Abigail's eyes lit up. "Not just saving the farm, but transforming it into something sustainable long-term, something that could support us both, something that could eventually pass to my children, if I ever have any." The mention of future generations struck William powerfully. Throughout the foreclosure crisis, he had been focused on not losing the past, the century of Harrison history embedded in this land. Now, for the first time, he found himself considering the future, what the farm might become in years he would not live to see. "There's one thing I need to be clear about," he said, meeting Abigail's gaze directly. "If we do this, if we take these loans and grants, implement this transition plan, you need to be fully committed. This won't just be my farm anymore. It will be our farm, with all the responsibility that entails." "I am committed," Abigail replied without hesitation. "Why do you think I moved back here after nursing school instead of taking that hospital?" "Job in Minneapolis? This land is in my blood too, Grandpa." William nodded, satisfied. "Then I think we notify Ms. Chen that we're accepting the senator's help. All of it." Abigail impulsively hugged him, her enthusiasm a sharp contrast to the heavy cloud of despair that had hung over the farmhouse for months. When she pulled back, William was surprised to find moisture in his own eyes, not tears of grief or loss, but of unexpected hope. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. The VA's protection order was formally issued, extending the foreclosure stay to 90 days and effectively removing the immediate threat to Harrison Farm. First National Bank, stung by the negative. Publicity surrounding their attempted acceleration of a decorated veterans foreclosure suddenly became remarkably accommodating, offering to suspend all penalties and late fees pending the resolution of the VA loan application. William found himself hosting a steady stream of agricultural specialists, sustainable farming experts, and even potential buyers for the specialty crops they were planning to grow. A chef from the finest restaurant in the nearest city spent an afternoon walking the property, discussing the specific mushroom varieties his kitchen would purchase directly from the farm at premium prices. Each morning, William and Abigail reviewed the developing transition plan over coffee, discussing adjustments, questioning assumptions, gradually taking ownership of what had initially been presented as external expertise. William found his decades of farming knowledge valued in unexpected ways. His intimate understanding of the property's microclimates, seasonal patterns, and soil variations proved invaluable as they refined the implementation strategy. 10 days. After the courthouse drama, Senator Mitchell herself returned to Clearwater County, arriving without fanfare in a single unmarked vehicle, rather than the official motorcade of her previous visit. She found William in the equipment shed, elbow-deep in the engine of his aging tractor, attempting to coax another season of life from the temperamental machinery. "Don't stop on my account," she said when he began to straighten, wiping his hands. On a rag. I grew up around farm equipment. My grandfather could rebuild a John Deere with his eyes closed. William nodded, appreciating that she didn't insist on formalities. Just trying to get old Bessie here ready for spring planting. Farm. Machinery's like an old Marine, doesn't know when to quit, even when the parts are wearing out. The senator smiled, leaning against a workbench. How are you feeling about the transition plan? My staff tells me you've been actively engaged in refining it. It's starting to feel less like someone else's rescue mission and more like our own path forward, William acknowledged. Your people know their stuff, especially that Erickson fellow from the university. Jim's one of the best. Turned his family's failing dairy operation into one of the most successful, sustainable farms in the state. She studied William thoughtfully. But expertise only gets you so far. These transitions work when the farmers themselves believe in them. William wiped a wrench clean before carefully returning it to its designated spot on the tool wall. Aye, habit of orderliness ingrained during military service and maintained throughout his civilian life. I've been farming this land for 50 years, Senator. Grew up working it alongside my father before that. Change doesn't come easy at my age. He paused, considering his next words carefully. But I'm starting to see that changing is the only way to keep what matters most, the land itself in our family, productive and viable. Senator Mitchell nodded, seemingly satisfied with his answer. That's why I wanted to speak with you personally today. The VA loan approval is moving forward, but there's another opportunity I wanted to discuss with you directly. She outlined a pilot program her office was developing, a Veterans Agricultural Heritage Initiative that would provide additional resources to farms with multi-generational military service connections, positioning them as training centers for other veterans interested in agricultural careers. Harrison Farm would be an ideal flagship for this initiative, she explained. 4 generations of military service, a century of agricultural heritage, and now a transition to innovative, sustainable methods that could serve as a model for other veteran farmers. William listened with growing interest as she detailed the additional support the program would offer: infrastructure improvements, training stipends for veterans who came to learn, marketing assistance to build the Harrison Farm brand for specialty products. Why us? He asked finally. There must be other veteran-owned farms with similar histories. The senator considered her response carefully. There are, and they'll be included as the program expands, but your situation has unique elements that make it particularly valuable as our initial showcase. She gestured toward the farmhouse, visible through the shed's open door. 4 generations on the same land. Decorated service from World War I through Afghanistan, and most importantly, the bridge between generations you and Abigail represent. The wisdom of experience combined with innovative vision for the future. She leaned forward slightly. The truth is, Mr. Harrison, we're losing family farms at an alarming rate, and we're failing our veterans in terms of viable career paths after service. This initiative addresses both crises simultaneously, using farms like yours to inspire and train the next generation of veteran farmers. The proposal resonated with William in unexpected ways. Throughout his life, both in the Marines and after, he had found purpose in mentoring others, young recruits during his service years, neighboring farmers' children who showed interest in agriculture, and of course, his own son and granddaughter. The idea of Harrison Farm becoming not just a productive operation, but a training ground for fellow veterans, appealed to the teacher in him. I'd need to discuss this with Abigail, he said finally. She's an equal partner in this now. Of course, the senator agreed. Take whatever time you need. This isn't a rescue mission anymore, Mr. Harrison. It's an invitation to help create something new, something that honors your family's legacy while building a foundation for others to follow. As the senator departed, promising to have detailed materials on the initiative sent over. William remained in the equipment shed, turning the conversation over in his mind. The transition from fighting to save his farm to potentially helping save others represented a profound shift in perspective, from recipient of assistance to provider of opportunity. That evening, he shared the senator's proposal with Abigail. Over dinner, her initial reaction was cautious enthusiasm, quickly followed by practical questions about implementation, time commitments, and potential impacts on their own transition timeline. It would mean opening the farm to others, William noted. Veterans coming to train, learn the methods we're developing. We'd be teachers as much as farmers. That's not necessarily a bad thing, Abigail replied thoughtfully. I've been thinking about the labor challenges with some of these specialty crops. Having trainees who are also helping with the work could be mutually beneficial. She tapped her fork against her plate absently, a habit when she was processing complex information, a gesture so reminiscent of her grandmother that it made William's heart catch. "You know what this reminds me of?" she said finally. "The stories you told me about your grandfather after World War I, how he hired other veterans to help establish this farm, taught them what he knew so they could eventually get their own land." William nodded, surprised by the parallel he hadn't immediately recognized. History repeating itself. Or maybe evolving, Abigail suggested. Each generation of Harrisons has found ways to serve beyond just working this land. Great-grandpa creating jobs for fellow veterans. Grandpa establishing the county's first agricultural co-op. You and Grandma hosting those military families during transitions. Maybe this is our generation's version of that tradition. The insight struck William profoundly. Throughout the foreclosure crisis, he had been focused on what he stood to lose: the land, the heritage, the physical manifestation of his family's history. Now, with the immediate threat receding, he could see more clearly what had always made Harrison Farm special. Not just the acreage or crops, but the values it represented: service, adaptation, community support, and passing knowledge to the next generation. "I think your grandmother would approve," he said finally. "She always said a farm should feed more than just bodies. It should feed souls too." Over the following days, as William and Abigail delved deeper into the veterans' agricultural heritage initiative materials, the farm itself seemed to stir with new energy. The warming temperatures of early March brought the first hints of spring. Crocuses pushing through melting snow near the farmhouse foundation, red-winged blackbirds returning to the marsh at the property's edge, the soil beginning to thaw in preparation for planting. William found himself viewing these familiar seasonal changes with fresh eyes. The north field that had always been problematic for traditional crops now represented opportunity, its partial shade and microclimates perfect for the mushroom cultivation. Abigail was researching with increasing enthusiasm. The sloped eastern section, too steep for efficient machine planting, was ideal for the berry varieties that commanded premium prices at farmers' markets and farm-to-table restaurants. Even the century-old farmhouse seemed to shed its air of decline, as architectural plans were drawn up for modest renovations that would create classroom space in the rarely used formal dining room and accommodate occasional overnight stays by veterans in training. The barn, which had been primarily used for equipment storage in recent years, was evaluated for conversion to a processing facility for their specialty crops. 30 days after the dramatic courthouse confrontation, William sat at his desk reviewing the most recent draft of the Harrison Farm Transition Plan, now a comprehensive document that integrated financial projections, implementation timelines, and marketing strategies. Beside it lay the approved VA loan documents, the funds already deposited in a specialized account dedicated to the farm's revitalization. A knock at the doorframe drew his attention. Abigail stood there, excitement evident in her expression. "They're here," she announced. "First delivery for the mushroom cultivation setup." William followed her to the equipment shed, which was being transformed into what Jim Erickson called a mycological wonderland. A delivery truck had arrived with specialized shelving, temperature control systems, and the first batches of inoculated growing medium for 3 varieties of gourmet mushrooms. As they directed the installation, William found himself impressed by Abigail's confident handling of the technical details. In just a few weeks, she had immersed herself in mycology with the same dedication she brought to her nursing career, absorbing information from experts, online courses, and practical demonstrations at the university's agricultural extension facilities. "We should see the first harvest in about 6 weeks," she explained, as the technicians set up monitoring equipment. "The shiitakes take longest, but the oyster mushrooms could be ready in as little as 4 weeks. I've already confirmed orders. With 3 restaurants in the city and the organic grocery cooperative." William shook his head in amazement. "From foreclosure to fungus farming in 30 days. Your grandmother would never believe it." "Oh, I think she would," Abigail countered, with a smile. "Grandma was always the adaptable one in the family, according to your stories. Didn't she convince you to try that experimental drought-resistant corn variety back in the 80s, when everyone else thought it was too risky?" "And saved the farm during that drought," William acknowledged. "Margaret always could see around. Corners better than me." The reminder of his late wife's foresight was bittersweet. Throughout their marriage, Margaret had often been the catalyst for evolution on Harrison Farm, gently but persistently encouraging William to consider new approaches when traditional methods faltered. In her absence, he had gradually retreated into increasingly rigid adherence to familiar practices, a pattern that had contributed to the farm's financial vulnerability. Now, watching Abigail confidently direct the installation of equipment for an agricultural method he would never have considered 6 months ago, William recognized that his granddaughter had inherited Margaret's gift for envisioning potential, where others saw only obstacles. Later that afternoon, as William walked the perimeter of the property, a daily ritual he had maintained throughout his farming life, he found himself at the small family cemetery where Margaret and James rested, beneath simple granite markers. The area, always meticulously maintained, despite the farm's financial challenges, had been included in the transition plan as the centerpiece of a memorial garden that would honor the farm's military heritage. "You were right, Maggie," he said, quietly to his wife's marker. "About change being necessary. About Abigail's potential, about so many things." He adjusted his marine cap, a gesture of respect. "I think you'd be proud of what's happening here. I think you'd say it's about time." A sense of peace settled over him, not the resignation he had felt when facing foreclosure, but a genuine acceptance that Harrison Farm was evolving as it should, shedding what no longer served while preserving what truly mattered. That evening, the farmhouse kitchen, always the heart of Harrison family life, hosted an impromptu gathering. Jim Erickson had stopped by with 2 veterans interested in the training program scheduled to begin in April. Rebecca Chen arrived, with updated marketing materials featuring the newly designed Harrison Farm Specialty Crops logo. Maria Vasquez from the VA brought final approval for the Heritage Initiative participation. As they shared a meal Abigail had prepared, featuring ingredients sourced from other veteran-owned farms in the state, William found himself drawn into conversations about agricultural innovations, market trends, and sustainable practices. The technical terminology that had initially seemed foreign now flowed more comfortably in his speech, integrated with the decades of practical farming wisdom he contributed to the discussions. "I have to say, William," Jim commented as the evening wound down, "you've embraced these changes more completely than I expected. Many farmers your age would still be fighting the transition every step of the way." William considered this as he poured coffee for his guests. "I fought it plenty. At first, still have moments of doubt. He glanced toward the window, where darkness had fallen over fields that would soon be planted in ways his grandfather could never have imagined. "But I've been thinking about something my drill instructor said back in 1969. Adapt, improvise, overcome. Been the Marine motto long before they put it in those movies." He settled into his chair at the head of the table, the same chair where 4 generations of Harrison men had presided over family meals, farm decisions, and community gatherings. "When I was in Vietnam, we'd get sent into situations where nothing went according to plan. The Marines who survived weren't always the strongest or even the best trained. They were the ones who could adapt when circumstances changed, who could see new paths forward when the original route was blocked." William gestured around the table, acknowledging each person who had contributed to the farm's resurrection. "What I've come to realize is that's exactly what farming has always been about too. My grandfather adapting to civilian life after the trenches. My father adapting his methods after being wounded at Okinawa. Every season brings challenges you can't predict. Drought, flood, pests, market crashes. The land remains the same, but how we work it has to evolve." Abigail touched his arm gently. "That's what this transition is really about, isn't it? Not just saving Harrison Farm today, but making sure it can adapt to whatever comes tomorrow." "Exactly," William agreed. "For the first time in years, I'm not just thinking about making it to the next harvest. I'm thinking about what this place will be when you're my age, what it could mean for other veterans looking for purpose after service." The conversation continued into the evening. Plans refined, connections strengthened, possibilities expanded. When the visitors finally departed, William and Abigail stood on the porch, watching taillights disappear down the long driveway. Molly settled contentedly at their feet. "Big day tomorrow," Abigail noted. "The berry field preparation starts, and we have that meeting with the heritage grain supplier." William nodded, feeling a familiar anticipation, the same mixture of hope, concern, and determination that had accompanied the start of every growing season throughout his farming life. But now that feeling was infused with something new, a sense of renewal rather than mere continuation, of building rather than simply maintaining. "Your father would be proud of you," he said quietly. "James always said you had the Harrison stubborn streak, but with more vision than the rest of us." Abigail smiled, leaning against the porch railing. "I was thinking earlier about Dad's deployment. Journals. How he wrote about wanting to come back to the farm, maybe update some of the approaches while honoring the traditions." Her voice softened. "In a way, we're completing the journey he didn't get to finish." The mention of his son brought the expected pang of grief, but it was tempered now by the recognition that James's spirit lived on in Abigail and in the renewed purpose of Harrison. Farm itself, 4 generations of service, to country, to land, to community, continuing in forms that evolved to meet changing needs while remaining true to foundational values. As they turned to go inside, William paused for a final look at his land, shadowy fields silvered by starlight, the distant tree line a darker silhouette against the night sky. For nearly a century, Harrison men and women had worked this soil, finding in its rhythms and requirements a purpose that transcended mere livelihood. Now, that purpose was expanding, reaching beyond the property lines to create opportunities for fellow veterans, beyond current methods to embrace sustainable innovations, beyond the immediate family, to build broader community connections. "You know," William said as they stepped back into the warmth of the kitchen, "your grandmother used to say something when things got tough. Harrisons bend, but we don't break. I always thought she meant we were stubborn, that we held our ground no matter what." He smiled slightly, understanding finally reaching him. But maybe what she really meant was that we adapt. We find new ways forward. We transform what we must while holding on to what matters most. Abigail's eyes brightened with unshed tears. "That sounds like Grandma." always saying things that had more than one layer of meaning. "Margaret was the wisest person I ever knew," William acknowledged. "Took me 73 years and nearly losing everything to really understand what she was teaching me all along." He removed his well-worn marine cap, placing it on its customary hook by the door, a small ritual marking the transition from the outside world to the sanctuary of home. The gesture carried deeper symbolism now, the boundary between past and future, between resistance and acceptance, between holding on and moving forward. "Tomorrow," he said with newfound certainty, "we start planting for harvests I may never see, and that's exactly as it should be." The kitchen clock chimed 9, the same timepiece that had marked Harrison family moments since 1943, its steady rhythm continuing through wars, economic upheavals, personal losses, and now, unexpected renewal. Some things would change in the coming months and years. Others would remain steadfastly the same. The wisdom lay in knowing which was which, and in finding the courage to embrace necessary evolution while honoring essential foundations. Outside, the land waited as it always had, patient, resilient, ready to respond to human care with abundant life. Inside, plans for tomorrow's work lay organized on the kitchen table, a blueprint for transformation rooted in century-old values. And between these two constants, the enduring land and the evolving vision, stood William Harrison, no longer merely fighting to save his past, but helping to create a future worthy of the sacrifices that had preserved this ground through 4 generations of service. The foreclosure that had threatened to end the Harrison legacy had instead become the catalyst for its renewal. What had seemed like an ending had revealed itself to be a new beginning. And in that transformation lay the deepest lesson of all, that sometimes what appears to be the loss of everything can become the foundation for something far greater than what came before. 1 year later, the fields of Harrison Farm bloomed, with vibrant life under the warm June sunshine. Where rows of conventional corn and soybeans had once stretched in monotonous uniformity, a diverse tapestry of crops now flourished. Heritage wheat with its amber heads nodding in the breeze, berry bushes laden with ripening fruit on the eastern slope, specialty vegetables in carefully tended sections near the farmhouse. The North Field, once considered marginal land due to partial shade from the woodlot, now housed the thriving mushroom operation that had quickly become the farm's signature enterprise. The equipment shed, transformed into a state-of-the-art mycology facility, hummed with climate control systems maintaining optimal growing conditions for 5 varieties of gourmet mushrooms that supplied restaurants across the state. Every weekend, the farm's modest roadside stand sold out of fresh mushrooms, berries and vegetables to local customers who had embraced the Harrison Farm Renaissance with enthusiastic support. In the century-old barn, now renovated with gleaming, stainless steel processing equipment, William Harrison stood watching his granddaughter demonstrate harvesting techniques to 3 veterans participating in the training program. At 74, he still moved with the straight-backed bearing of a Marine, though he carried a wooden cane carved by a fellow Vietnam veteran, not so much for physical support as for the satisfaction of having created something beautiful from a piece of ash harvested from the farm's woodlot. "The key with shiitakes," Abigail was explaining, her hands skilled and confident as she demonstrated the proper cutting angle, "is harvesting at precisely the right stage of development. Too early, and you lose flavor complexity. Too late, and shelf life diminishes." The trainees, 2 women and 1 man, all under 35, all transitioning from military to civilian careers, listened with focused attention, asking pertinent questions that revealed their growing agricultural knowledge. William observed, with quiet pride, how naturally Abigail had grown into her role as lead instructor for the mushroom and berry cultivation components of the Veterans Agricultural Heritage Initiative. The program, which had launched with Harrison Farm as its flagship location, now included 7 veteran-owned farms across the state, each specializing in different sustainable agricultural approaches. 3 months earlier, Senator Mitchell had brought a congressional delegation to tour the operation, resulting in expanded funding and national recognition for the initiative. "Mr. Harrison," one of the trainees called, noticing him at the barn entrance, "could you tell us again about the irrigation modifications you developed for the berry fields? We're trying to implement something similar at my mentor's farm." William nodded, stepping forward to join the group. This had become the rhythm of days at Harrison Farm, a seamless integration of teaching and doing, of traditional wisdom and innovative approaches, of Abigail's modern techniques and William's lifetime of agricultural experience. "It's a hybrid system," he explained, falling easily into the mentor role that had become increasingly comfortable over the past year. Takes the micro-drip technology the university developed and adapts it to work with terrain variations. We discovered that by adjusting flow rates 1 year later, the fields of Harrison Farm bloomed with vibrant life under the warm June sunshine. Where rows of conventional corn and soybeans had once stretched in monotonous uniformity, a diverse tapestry of crops now flourished. Heritage wheat, with its amber heads nodding in the breeze, berry bushes laden with ripening fruit on the eastern slope, specialty vegetables in carefully tended sections near the farmhouse. The north field, once considered marginal land due to partial shade from the woodlot, now housed the thriving mushroom operation that had quickly become the farm's signature enterprise. The equipment shed, transformed into a state-of-the-art mycology facility, hummed with climate control systems maintaining optimal growing conditions for 5 varieties of gourmet mushrooms that supplied restaurants across the state. Every weekend, the farm's modest roadside stand sold out of fresh mushrooms, berries and vegetables to local customers who had embraced the Harrison Farm Renaissance with enthusiastic support. In the century-old barn, now renovated with gleaming, stainless steel processing equipment, William Harrison stood watching his granddaughter demonstrate harvesting techniques to 3 veterans participating in the training program. At 74, he still moved with the straight-backed bearing of a Marine, though he carried a wooden cane carved by a fellow Vietnam veteran, not so much for physical support as for the satisfaction of having created something beautiful from a piece of ash harvested from the farm's woodlot. "The key with shiitakes," Abigail was explaining, her hands skilled and confident as she demonstrated the proper cutting angle, "is harvesting at precisely the right stage of development. Too early and you lose flavor complexity, too late and shelf life diminishes." The trainees, 2 women and 1 man, all under 35, all transitioning from military to civilian careers, listened with focused attention, asking pertinent questions that revealed their growing agricultural knowledge. William observed, with quiet pride, how naturally Abigail had grown into her role as lead instructor for the mushroom and berry cultivation components of the Veterans Agricultural Heritage Initiative. The program, which had launched with Harrison Farm as its flagship location, now included 7 veteran-owned farms across the state, each specializing in different sustainable agricultural approaches. 3 months earlier, Senator Mitchell had brought a congressional delegation to tour the operation, resulting in expanded funding and national recognition for the initiative. "Mr. Harrison," one of the trainees called, noticing him at the barn entrance, "could you tell us again about the irrigation modifications you developed for the berry fields? We're trying to implement something similar at my mentor's farm." William nodded, stepping forward to join the group. This had become the rhythm of days at Harrison Farm, a seamless integration of teaching and doing, of traditional wisdom and innovative approaches, of Abigail's modern techniques and William's lifetime of agricultural experience. "It's a hybrid system," he explained, falling easily into the mentor role that had become increasingly comfortable over the past year. takes the micro-drip technology the university developed and adapts it to work with terrain variations. We discovered that by adjusting flow rates based on soil composition and slope angle, we could reduce water usage by nearly 40% while improving berry yield and quality. He noticed with satisfaction that all 3 trainees were taking notes, a stark contrast to his initial skepticism that young veterans would have genuine interest in agricultural minutiae. Over the past year, he had worked with nearly 24 transitioning service members through the program, and almost without exception, they brought the same qualities to farming that had served them in the military: discipline, attention to detail, resilience, and the ability to follow complex systems while adapting to changing conditions. Later that afternoon, as the day's formal training concluded, William settled on the farmhouse porch with Jim Erickson, who now served as the university's Director of Veteran Agricultural Programs, a position created largely due to the success of the Harrison Farm model. They shared glasses of iced tea, a moment of respite before the evening's event, a farm-to-table dinner that would showcase Harrison Farm products to restaurant chefs and specialty food buyers from across the region. "Hard to believe it's been a year since we were fighting to save this place from foreclosure," Jim commented, gazing out over the transformed landscape. "You've accomplished more in 12 months than most operations do in 5 years. William shook his head modestly. "Had a lot of help, and motivation makes a difference. Nothing focuses the mind like almost losing everything you care about." "True, but not everyone could have made this transition, especially at your stage of life." Jim gestured toward the eastern fields, where specialized harvesting equipment, purchased through the VA grant program, was gathering the first cutting of heritage wheat. Most farmers your age would have taken the VA loan, cleared the bank debt, and continued conventional farming until retirement. The complete reimagining of Harrison Farm, that took vision. "Abigail's vision more than mine," William acknowledged, watching his granddaughter directing final preparations for the evening's event in the renovated barn. "I just had the sense to get out of her way and contribute where I could." Jim smiled. "You do yourself a disservice, William. The trainees consistently rate your mentorship as one of the most valuable aspects of the program. Your ability to bridge traditional farming knowledge with sustainable innovations gives them a perspective they can't get anywhere else." Before William could respond, a familiar black SUV turned into the long driveway, no longer part of an official motorcade, but immediately recognizable as Senator Mitchell's vehicle. In the year since her dramatic courtroom intervention, she had visited Harrison Farm regularly, using it as a showcase for her rural revitalization initiatives and bringing potential supporters to see firsthand how traditional family farms could evolve to meet contemporary challenges. "Right on time," William noted, checking his watch, another military habit that civilian life had never erased. "She's bringing that chef from Chicago today, the one looking to source exclusively from veteran-owned farms for his new restaurant." As they rose to greet the senator, William reflected on how profoundly his relationship with political authority had changed. Throughout most of his life, he had viewed government with the wary respect typical of rural farmers, necessary but distant, occasionally helpful but often obstructive. Now he had witnessed firsthand how targeted public programs, thoughtfully implemented with private partnerships, could create meaningful change for individuals and communities. The evening's event unfolded with the practiced coordination that had become a Harrison Farm hallmark. 60 guests gathered in the renovated barn, transformed for the occasion with twinkling lights, fresh flowers from the new cutting garden, and tables crafted by a veteran woodworker from timber, harvested during sustainable management of the farm's woodlot. The meal showcased Harrison Farm's diverse products: mushroom appetizers, salads featuring their heirloom vegetables, main courses incorporating heritage grains, and desserts, highlighting their berries. Each course was introduced by either William or Abigail, explaining the sustainable practices behind its production and the veteran training components involved. During dessert, a spectacular berry tart created by a pastry chef who had become one of their most loyal customers. Senator Mitchell rose to address the gathering. William noticed how she had eschewed formal political attire for the occasion, dressed instead in simple slacks and a blouse that reflected her genuine comfort in agricultural settings. "1 year ago today," she began, her voice carrying easily. "Through the barn, without artificial amplification, I stood in a courtroom watching a century of agricultural heritage and military service legacy nearly erased by financial forces that failed to recognize their true value." She gestured toward William and Abigail. "What we've witnessed since then isn't just the saving of one farm, though that alone would be worth celebrating. What the Harrisons have created here is a model for how family farms can remain viable in the 21st century while honoring their historical roots." The senator continued, outlining how the Veterans Agricultural Heritage Initiative had expanded based on Harrison Farm's success, now including operations in 7 states with plans for national implementation within 3 years. The economic impacts were substantial, creating sustainable livelihoods for transitioning veterans, revitalizing rural communities, promoting environmentally sound agricultural practices, and preserving irreplaceable farming knowledge across generations. But perhaps most importantly, she concluded, initiatives like this demonstrate that when we recognize the true value of service, both military and agricultural, we strengthen the fabric of our nation in ways that transcend politics and economics. As applause filled the renovated barn, William found himself reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past year. The farm that had nearly slipped from his grasp now hummed with renewed purpose, its future more secure than it had been. In decades, the foreclosure that had threatened to end 4 generations of Harrison stewardship had instead become the catalyst for unforeseen transformation. Later that evening, after the guests had departed and the cleanup was complete, William walked the perimeter of his property, a daily ritual maintained through good times and bad. Molly's daughter Scout, now fully grown, trotted faithfully at his side, occasionally darting off to investigate interesting scents before returning to heel. The full moon illuminated the diverse landscape that Harrison Farm had become, a testament to adaptation rather than surrender, to evolution rather than extinction. William paused at the small family cemetery where Margaret and James rested, recently enhanced with a meditation garden that had become a favorite spot for veterans in the training program seeking quiet reflection. "You were right, Maggie," he said softly to his wife's marker. A conversation continued across the boundary of years. "You always said Harrison Farm was more than just land and crops. It was a foundation for something larger than ourselves." He stood in silence for a moment, feeling the gentle night breeze against his face, carrying the complex aromas of healthy soil, growing plants, and the distinctive earthiness of the mushroom cultivation facility. The land spoke in its own language, one he had spent a lifetime learning to interpret, and now found himself teaching others to understand. Walking back toward the farmhouse, William observed lights still glowing in Abigail's cottage. Since the farm's transformation, she had reduced her hospital hours to part-time, devoting herself primarily to developing the agricultural operation and training program. Her medical background had proven unexpectedly valuable in establishing the precise scientific protocols for the specialty mushroom cultivation, creating a niche that set Harrison Farm apart from competitors. William knocked lightly on her door, finding her at her desk surrounded by planning documents for the next phase of expansion, a proposed medicinal herb garden that would utilize another section of previously marginal land. "Just wanted to say "Good night," he said, "and that you did an outstanding job with the dinner event. The senator was impressed." Oh, Abigail smiled, pushing aside her paperwork. "I learned from the best. Grandma always said the key to any successful gathering was making every guest feel personally connected to the experience." "She would be proud of what you've accomplished here," William said, meaning it deeply. "What we've accomplished together." Abigail studied him thoughtfully. "You know, I was thinking earlier today about where we were a year ago. You ready to lose everything, me trying desperately to find some way to save the farm." She gestured toward the plans on her desk. "I never imagined we'd end up here, not just surviving but thriving, creating something that's helping other veterans find their path." William nodded, settling into the chair across from her desk. "Life rarely follows the path we expect. That's something both farming and military service teach you pretty quickly. I've been meaning to ask you something," Abigail said, her expression turning serious. "Are you truly happy with what Harrison Farm has become? It's so different from the traditional operation you ran for 50 years. The question deserved thoughtful consideration, and William gave it the reflection it merited. For months after the foreclosure crisis, he had viewed the changes primarily as necessary compromises to save the land itself. But somewhere along the journey, his perspective had shifted fundamentally. "I am happy," he said finally, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "Not just because we saved the farm, but because what we've created has more purpose than what came before. We're not just growing crops anymore, we're growing people, opportunities, community connections." He leaned forward slightly. "Your great-grandfather bought this land with his service bonus because he wanted to build something that would last, that would provide for future generations. I think what we're doing now honors that intention more truly than simply continuing conventional farming until the economics forced us out." Abigail's eyes brightened. "That's what I was hoping you'd say. Because I've been invited to present the Harrison Farm model at the National Veterans Agricultural Conference next month, and I wanted to be sure you were fully on board before I accepted." "More than on board," William assured her. "Ready to help however I can." As he walked back to the main farmhouse under the star-filled sky, William felt a profound sense of completion, not an ending, but the fulfillment of a circle. The crisis that had nearly cost him everything had ultimately led to renewal beyond anything he could have envisioned. The following morning brought another milestone in Harrison Farm's evolution. A local high school agricultural class arrived for a scheduled tour. 20 teenagers, accompanied by their teacher, eager to learn about sustainable farming practices and the integration of traditional and innovative approaches. William, who once would have considered himself ill-suited for engaging with restless adolescents, now found unexpected satisfaction in sharing his knowledge with the younger generation. He led half the group through the heritage grain fields, explaining the environmental and market advantages of older wheat varieties, while Abigail took the remainder through the mushroom cultivation facility. "So, you almost lost the whole farm?" one boy asked bluntly, as William demonstrated grain quality assessment techniques. "And now you're like famous for mushrooms and stuff." William smiled at the teenager's directness. "That's about the size of it. Came within minutes of losing everything, then found a way to transform it into something better than before." "Because of the senator lady?" another student questioned. "Senator Mitchell's intervention was crucial," William acknowledged, "but the real transformation came from being willing to reimagine what this land could become, what purpose it could serve beyond what we'd always done." A girl at the back of the group, quieter than her classmates, raised her hand tentatively. "My grandfather's a Vietnam vet too," she said, when William nodded to her. "He's having trouble with his farm now, can't compete with the big corporate operations. Could he maybe come learn about what you're doing here?" The question touched William deeply, reminding him of his own initial resistance to change, his stubborn adherence to familiar methods even as they proved increasingly unsustainable. "Not only could he visit," William replied, "but we have a specific program designed for veterans in exactly his situation. Give me his contact information before you leave, and I'll reach out personally." As the tour continued, William found himself increasingly energized by the students' curiosity, their fresh perspectives, their lack of preconceived notions about what farming should be. Their questions challenged him to articulate the philosophy that had gradually emerged through Harrison Farm's transformation, a belief that agricultural heritage was about values and connection to the land rather than rigid adherence to traditional methods. During lunch, served at picnic tables near the new educational pavilion constructed to accommodate visiting groups, the agricultural teacher pulled William aside. "I have to tell you, Mr. Harrison, this visit is making a powerful impact on my students," she said. "Many of them come from farming families facing the same economic pressures you experienced. Seeing a successful alternative model is opening their eyes to possibilities they hadn't considered." William nodded, understanding completely. "A year ago, I couldn't have imagined most of what you see here today. Sometimes the best innovation comes from having your back against the wall." "That's exactly the message they need to hear," the teacher agreed. "That adaptation isn't surrender, it's the highest form of resilience." After the school group departed, William found himself reflecting on their visit while repairing an irrigation line in the berry field, still preferring to keep his hands engaged in practical farm work, despite the increasing administrative demands of the operation. The young girl's question about her grandfather had struck a particular chord, reminding him how easily he could have been that struggling veteran, clinging to familiar methods as economic realities shifted beneath him. The key difference, he realized, had been the unexpected intervention that forced him to consider alternatives he would have otherwise rejected. Without the foreclosure crisis and Senator Mitchell's dramatic courthouse appearance, he likely would have continued conventional farming until age or economics finally forced him to sell the land, missing entirely the extraordinary second chapter that Harrison Farm had discovered. That evening, as William completed his daily perimeter walk with Scout, his phone rang. The smartphone he had finally accepted as a necessary tool for the farm's evolving operations. The number was unfamiliar. "Harrison Farm," he answered still, preferring the traditional greeting that connected him to generations of his family. "Mr. Harrison, this is George Calloway. My granddaughter Madison was in the school group that visited your farm today." William smiled, recognizing the name immediately. "Mr. Calloway, Madison mentioned you're a Vietnam veteran having some challenges with your operation." "That's putting it mildly," the man replied, his voice carrying the distinctive cadence of rural stoicism, masking deeper concern. "Been farming the same way for 40 years, but the margins keep shrinking. Was about ready to sell out to one of those corporate outfits, buying up all the family farms around here." "I was in the same position last year," William told him. "Nearly lost everything to foreclosure." "Madison said something about a special program for vets. Frankly, I've never been one for government handouts, but—" "Neither was I," William assured him. "This isn't a handout. It's an investment in preserving agricultural knowledge and creating sustainable veteran livelihoods. Why don't you come see for yourself? We have a veteran farmer orientation session tomorrow morning." After arranging details for Calloway's visit, William continued his walk, feeling a profound sense of coming full circle. A year ago, he had been the struggling farmer, resistant to change, skeptical of outside assistance, unable to envision a different approach to the land he loved. Now he found himself in the position of guide, helping others navigate the same challenging transition. That night, William dreamed of Margaret. Not an unusual occurrence, but this dream carried particular vividness. They walked the farm together, as they had thousands of times during their marriage, but the landscape shifted between past and present, conventional crop rows blending into the diverse tapestry that Harrison Farm had become. She smiled at him with characteristic wisdom, saying nothing but radiating approval that required no words. He woke before dawn, the dream still vivid in his mind, filled with a sense of rightness about the path they had chosen. As the first light of morning painted the eastern sky with delicate color, William stood at his bedroom window observing the land that had been Harrison ground for over a century, transformed now, yet more deeply connected to its founding purpose than ever before. The day that followed brought yet another evolution in Harrison Farm's expanding mission. George Calloway arrived early, a wiry man in his 70s, with the unmistakable bearing of a veteran, accompanied by his granddaughter Madison from the school group. They were joined by 4 other veterans at various stages of agricultural experience, all drawn by the growing reputation of the training program. William and Abigail led the orientation session together, their natural rhythm as presenters reflecting a year of refining their approach. They shared the Harrison Farm story candidly, the near loss to foreclosure, the dramatic intervention, the challenging but rewarding transition to sustainable methods. They outlined the Veterans Agricultural Heritage Initiative's resources, from training programs to grant opportunities to ongoing mentorship. Throughout the presentation, William observed George Calloway closely, recognizing in the older veteran's expression the same journey he himself had traveled, from skepticism to curiosity to cautious interest. When the formal session concluded, and the participants moved to tour different aspects of the operation, William fell into step beside Calloway. 40 years conventional farming, you said? William asked as they walked toward the heritage grain fields. Calloway nodded. Corn and soybeans, just like my father, worked fine until the big operation started squeezing the margins. Last few years, barely breaking even. Same story here, William confirmed. Tried to outwork the economics, but you can't compete with corporate scale in commodity crops. They paused at the edge of the field where the specialized harvesting equipment was collecting the heritage wheat, a variety that commanded premium prices from artisanal bakeries and craft breweries. This wheat gets 5 times the price per bushel of conventional, William explained. Lower yield, but higher value and lower input costs. The marketing connects directly to restaurants and specialty producers who care about the story behind their ingredients, especially when it involves veteran farmers. Calloway studied the operation with a farmer's experienced eye. Seems complicated. Lot of new techniques to learn at our age. It is, William agreed honestly. Steepest learning curve I've faced since the Marines. But that's where the program comes in. You don't do it alone. The training, mentorship, and connections make the transition possible. They continued their tour, discussing specific challenges and opportunities, the conversation gradually shifting from general information to practical application for Calloway's specific situation. By the time they rejoined the larger group for lunch, the older veteran was actively engaged, asking detailed questions about implementation timelines and resource requirements. As the visitors prepared to depart late that afternoon, Calloway approached William privately. I came here mostly to humor my granddaughter, he admitted. Didn't really believe there was a viable alternative to selling out. He gestured toward the diverse agricultural landscape around them. But seeing this, talking to you, and the other veterans in the program, it's got me thinking maybe there's another path forward. William recognized the moment for what it was, not yet a commitment, but the critical opening of mind that made change possible. It mirrored his own journey, the gradual recognition that adaptation represented not surrender, but evolution. "The land remembers those who care for it," William said, drawing on wisdom his grandfather had shared decades earlier. "Sometimes the best way to honor tradition is to find new ways to keep that care alive." Calloway nodded thoughtfully. "Madison's been saying I'm too stubborn for my own good. Maybe she's right." He extended his hand. "I'd like to come back, learn more about the program, maybe visit some of the other veteran farms in the network." As they shook hands, the firm grip of men who had spent lifetimes working soil and serving country, William felt the profound satisfaction of paying forward the opportunity he had been given. The foreclosure crisis that had nearly ended the Harrison legacy had instead multiplied it, extending its impact beyond property lines to influence other struggling veterans and farms. That evening, as William and Abigail reviewed the day's events, over dinner in the farmhouse kitchen, she raised a topic they had discussed periodically throughout the year. "I think it's time we formally adjusted the farm's legal structure," she suggested. "The Veterans Agricultural Heritage Initiative is recommending all participating farms establish clear succession plans to ensure continuity." William nodded, having anticipated this conversation. The transition plan had focused initially on immediate survival, then on operational transformation. Now, with Harrison Farm thriving, long-term sustainability required addressing governance and leadership succession. "I've been thinking the same," he agreed. "A family agricultural trust would make sense, preserving the land for agricultural use while creating a formal structure for your eventual leadership and potential training of future generations." The discussion continued into the evening as they outlined principles for the trust, ensuring the land remained dedicated to sustainable agriculture with priority for veteran involvement, establishing governance mechanisms that honored historical legacy while embracing innovation, creating pathways for future generations of Harrisons and others committed to the farm's mission. As the plans took shape, William felt a profound sense of completing a circle, not just saving the farm for the present, but ensuring its purpose would continue long after his own stewardship ended. The century-old legacy of Harrison Farm was evolving from simply maintaining family ownership to sustaining a living heritage of agricultural knowledge, veteran support, and community connection. 2 days later, William stood at the podium of the County Agricultural Extension Office's largest meeting room, facing an audience of over 50 local farmers gathered for a workshop on transitioning to sustainable practices. A year earlier, he would have been an unlikely presenter, perhaps even a skeptical attendee. Now he found himself advocating for approaches he had once resisted, sharing the hard-won wisdom of Harrison Farm's transformation. "The truth is," he told the assembled farmers, many of whom faced economic challenges similar to those that had nearly cost him everything, "I didn't choose this path willingly. It took nearly losing my farm to open my eyes to possibilities I'd been too stubborn to consider." He gestured toward projected images of Harrison Farm's diverse operations, the mushroom cultivation facility, the heritage grain fields, the berry production, the educational programs. "What I've learned through this journey is that preserving agricultural heritage isn't about maintaining identical methods across generations. It's about sustaining the core values that have always defined family farming: stewardship of the land, connection to community, passing knowledge to the next generation." As he concluded his presentation and responded to questions from farmers eager to understand how similar transitions might work for their operations, William reflected on the extraordinary distance he had traveled in just 1 year, from the brink of losing everything to becoming a guide for others seeking sustainable paths forward. The foreclosure that had seemed like an ending had instead become a beginning. The crisis that had threatened to erase a century of Harrison history had ultimately deepened and expanded its meaning. And the unexpected intervention that had halted. The auction had initiated not just the saving of one farm, but the creation of a model with potential to preserve countless others. Later that day, as William walked the perimeter of his property in the golden light of late afternoon, the daily ritual maintained through crisis and transformation, he paused at his favorite viewpoint, overlooking the diverse tapestry Harrison farm had become. Scout trotted a few steps ahead, alert and content in her role as companion and guardian. A century earlier, his grandfather had returned from the trenches of World War I and invested his service bonus in this land, envisioning it as a foundation for generations to come. That vision had endured through depression, war, market crashes, and personal losses, not unchanged, but adapted to meet each era's challenges while remaining true to its founding purpose. Now, as William surveyed fields that had nearly slipped from his grasp, he understood more deeply than ever that his grandfather's true legacy wasn't the physical property, but the values it embodied: service, resilience, adaptation, community, support, and passing knowledge to the next generation. The courthouse drama that had seemed like the culmination of his story had proven instead to be the beginning of its most meaningful chapter. The farm that had nearly been lost had been not just saved, but transformed into something more vital and sustainable than before. And the elderly veteran, who had once believed his best days were behind him, had discovered an unexpected second act. Not just as a farmer, but as a teacher, mentor, and catalyst for change that would ripple far beyond Harrison land. As the sun began its descent, painting the diverse fields with amber light, William turned toward home with quiet gratitude for the journey that had brought him here. Not despite the near catastrophe of foreclosure, but because of it. The crisis that had threatened everything he valued had ultimately revealed what mattered most, creating space for renewal that would extend the Harrison legacy far beyond what he could have imagined when he stood on the courthouse steps one year before, watching a senator's motorcade arrive to change everything. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.